wanted to share a concept, or really the reality to flow and the flow of things here. It's interesting how we created concepts like the term universe. It really clearly is meant to describe and show how there's a rhythm, flow, the pulse or beat to whatever we want to call this. Given things like that, what really should be understood is our sentient nature is not in fact aligned to this ultimate rhythm or flow to whatever this is. You have case in point when we look at how, things like how we look to survive, maintain, ration pretty much within our well-being, while at the same time, Mother Nature gives not two fucks about us, and at the same time is concurrently, intrinsically kicking us out of this existence while we're looking to maintain it. So this creation and the order of it is really pretty much a resistance to the original, non-created, uncreated, whatever terms you want to say, non-dual, chaos, complete, quote unquote state to things. We can't really get around it. To maybe put it more in a human context, it can also be said in a similar way with how our spiritual self is not aligned to our physical self. And this would go for anyone down here. It's just really being honest and identifying how there is a lack of actual flow here. There's a clear lack of flow and a constant uphill battle to this, that there's a friction to this. Maybe putting it another way, you have movies like the franchise of series of Star Wars. We know we have, sayings like there's a disruption to the force. Well, this creation really is that disruption to the true force. It's like a blockage pretty much that's going on here. Such said blockage, which we are deliberately wishing to maintain through our homeostasis against such inevitable equilibrium we will all face here. So given all that, I've personally been thinking, given these points in a clear way, it should be shown how we are all having an affection towards the act of being constipated. So of course that sounds silly in a way, but hear me out. And I'm sure for those that are already in the know, they already get my point anyhow. But so when we look more into this, we know that we want life to be effortless when it clearly is not. Life is work for anything. And more than anything else we really can say here. That's why for any mature mind, it would have to let you know that, this really isn't life. That person would also in part maybe let you know that this more so is just birth and death. Life is more so a self-deluded terminology on top of what is birth and death. But going further into that contemplation, it's shown, whether we like to admit it or not, that we try to hold on to things when at the same time we know that these things are going to go away, right? We attempt to hold on to certain fleeting moments, certain temporary experiences or sets of memories. And in large part, this is due to the dullness and the monotony that comes with this existence. Now, what I just described, though, is the best bang that we got for our buck. I mean, that's the best that we got, which is for whatever quote unquote preferred, good forms of constipation. But mind you, honestly, it's not the highest form, which we would have to admit in terms of the quantity when it's listed against the other forms. So, I'm sure we've all heard the concepts, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, there's different forms to this. What was already described, just rewind if you don't remember, was the good. Next, being the bad type, is having to force or essentially discipline yourself to do something you really would rather not have to do. But in part, it's good for you in the context of what it is to be a human being here. Things like eating right. We have to exercise, get enough sleep, do things like higher education, obtaining a particular upstanding career, In this instance, it should be understood how we hold on to, in this case, again, it's bad. It's just bad. But you can call it non-preferred, ultimately non-desirable things which we would rather not had been placed to have to cling on to. And that's just for any honest mind. Anyone who would say that they enjoy struggling and suffering and essentially going through involuntary human predicaments, anyone that's saying they enjoy that should just stop this video, because that's just not an honest take to have in this mature conversation. But going on, you have other types for the third type. Of course, again, the good, the bad. In this case, you also have the ugly. And for that, that is more so describing holding on to things that are actually, in part, undoubtedly harmful to ourselves, really in a visceral way. You have the general run-of-the-mills list of bad forms of habits or addictions that comes with humans. Of course, gambling. And that's not just in the conventional sense. Procreation is already gambling. You have, drugs, prescription drugs, alcohol, people that overeat, overstimulation to anything. Just take your pick. And part of what really makes that an ugly type of constipation, right, is given the fact of how we know at some level of awareness how, these things are destructive to ourselves. Yet and still, we can't resist fulfilling the temptation. So it's really a sloppy and essentially ugly circumstance when we see how it gets played out when you really look at it. So, we have people who instinctively, or unfortunately enough, sickly, deliberately looks to justify this, game of birth and death with their reasoning essentially embodying that of whatever set of preferred, quote unquote, good set of forms to, this constipation game, which is more than anything, people look to justify it by explaining whatever highs to this life that it comes with. So it's really not the quote unquote bad type, right? We have the good, the bad, and the ugly. People look to really focus first on that first portion, the good type of, constipation. But of course, you have people that even look to make justifications with the bad forms and even the uglies, which just goes more into the grotesque nature with us human creatures. But it's not good at any way really to look to glorify any of this, which is just essentially being a monkey, an animal being in this suit. It's not anything to glorify, especially in an ethical conversation. People like us we're just calling it for what it is, calling the shit out really for what it is, pun intended. So with all this, really, it's to recognize that essentially, when you hear or when you see, you witness somebody justifying procreation, when you see that someone talk about how amazing whatever type of experience is within this midst of the, concurrent birth and death flux that we have to experience here, that essentially they are describing in clear technicality a subjective perspective within their own preferred, good, bad, or, ugly set of constipation. That's just, again, the case. They're just superimposing their subjective perspective on top of that, which is what they can do. But, I mean, again, it's not ethical. It's really sick, which is the whole point. I hope that is clear to, be seen here. But anyone who would say they disagree with what I'm saying here, or essentially they're just hypocritical, which in many parts is the issue here. I mean, just consider this. Consider this. We humans, we tend to refrain from being hypocritical, right? I think that's a fair thing to say. We humans look to avoid being hypocritical. And for anyone saying that they don't, they're essentially just lying to themselves, which is proving the whole point again. But with that being said, when we look at things like how from before, to maintain our survival, let alone the idea to the concept of even thriving in this type of world, it is already inherently hypocritical. For those that may not know why, well, we should know that this is a vampiric world, and I really can't fathom how there are people that know this but still impose it. I guess in part why I can't fathom the minds of those types of people is because of sayings of like how people don't really have their own minds. They don't have their own, mind, that their minds are given to them. So, points like that kind of show how people are they're lost, just lost. But back to how this world is inherently vampiric. We know that we are sustaining ourselves through the exploitation, of other living things. But on the flip side, we clearly look to ward off anything that looks to exploit or abuse us. Given, of course, when we are able to fend off or, take against anything that is intending on inflicting such exploitation to us, of course. But again, we look to do it on one side, but on the other side, we look to refrain from it. So again, with this whole hypocritical nature with human beings, just not fair of a mentality to look to self-justify on imposing. So, we should be able to grasp, this understanding. It comes back to a certain intuitive knowing of an obvious reality of how evil you, quote unquote, and I, quote unquote, are. We have sayings that I'm sure you've heard. People say all the time that we're here to learn and experience. And, while I have a lot to say about that statement, it should be clear for anyone to see that we are literally inflicting this evil and harm, even just to our own selves, let alone to others. So let that be a lesson and experience for you. And as I say, any honest, mature, and fair mind would not contend against this understanding. Anyone not understanding is simply not listening, and, they can rewatch it, or I can look to be more structured, but maybe in part they just don't have a mind, as said before. And if you really know your stuff, you know that there really, again, is no, the you or I per se at all from the start. It goes back to concepts like the no self principle from things like the concepts to religions or philosophies like Buddhism. We can, forget about sayings like how we own a car, pet, house, whatever thing, when really more so we should know that we don't even own our bodies. So before we look to place any ownership in this existence, we don't even own these bodies in and of itself to begin with. There is an intrinsic involuntary nature to things here. If you want to take it akin to a boss and employee analogy, you wouldn't say that you're your own boss, that you own your boss. That doesn't make sense. And really, the body is more so the boss in our relationship to it. So again, it doesn't make sense to impose. Does not make sense to impose, but people do what they want to do. But if you reach this point of the video, I'll mention a point that I believe in part to be a gem, but It's really not much for those that are in the know, but I do believe it to be a personal conviction for myself and others from what I've seen. That being the fact that, once Black people really get hipped to this type of mentality, that really could be a problem. Problem more so on the mundane level. It's going to make this type of awareness, the level to it, the consciousness, more contagious in the popular setting. Really, any one of us should know how Black culture attracts other subcultures and the, appropriation element to human behavior. I just don't think it's saying much that us Black folks are, basically at the bottom of the social rank ladder. I believe I mentioned before already, hypocritical. And so, you can just tell me, but you can't tell me. You can't tell me that, for us Black folks as a quote unquote, we the people, it's just, you can't tell me that we're not, hypocritical in the fact of how we're playing an inevitable part onto the harm of our loved ones. And it's nothing to do with any such white supremacy that we would look to pin the blame on, which we are not doing anything about. And I hate the fact that I feel compelled to say this, but like I mentioned in past videos, this is not eugenics. This goes for any people, but I'm Black, so here I am talking within that perspective. And let me tell you, us Black folks, we like to rather look at past historic, events, slavery, the civil rights era, any past event that wasn't a good time in human history. We look at those moments and we cry at the brutality that was going on. But then we look at today's times and in essence, nothing really has changed. We're going through this same flux of birth and death and all the harms that comes embedded with, in between it. And we know this, but we're turning a blind eye to the reality that we are creating our own problem by placing ourselves in this predicament. So I'm not sure if it will happen, but man, if it does, to a certain extent, obviously higher than what it is currently, it would be interesting to see how if more Black folks were on board with this message. Because like I said before, Black culture is just frankly hip. And if, we look to embody something, and in this case, it's not doing something, let alone not doing something due to a ethical reasoning, I can only imagine the effect that could possibly have on a grander scale in a probable reality. To go personally within my own life, and I feel like this should be for anyone that's listening to this, for anyone that I call a friend in my life, they already know this about me. There's no hiding around the bush, beating around the bush, covering it under the, floor mat. No, this is something that we should all, encourage ourselves and others to talk about to our loved ones. Because, we're talking about our hypothetical loved ones. And in fact, if our loved ones love us, they will let these conversations permeate. Okay, if they're honest, if they are mature, they will let this conversation, marinate. Because it's a significant conversation we're doing, and we're talking about the most significant thing that we can look to do to someone else, which is, of course, place them here at bottom. But, with that being said, for the most part, us Black folks are still trying to make this, place bump. When really the party is done, this world is pretty much a lost cause. You can look to put it like this. You don't eat something that's within a fucked up batch. You really throw it out and you start over. So now, please, I'm not saying that Black people or whoever are supposed to start over within anything going on here. In the context, of course, the unborn, there is ultimately no, socio-political plan we are to do here to revamp things here for the, quote unquote, better. No, that's not the case. The doing over in this sense is going back and reversing the natural coil and course to our nature here. So with going back to that universe concept, we should all know that this beat that us sentient life forms are pulsating is pretty lame as hell when you look at it. And let alone when you look at, how we are a part of a greater rhythm, a more clearer and effortless flow that's on top of this, that's greater than this, more potent, and the ultimate source. So really, even if any one of us would want to masochistically say that this current flow that we are doing is hot, if only we were to actually truly know the ultimate flow that this creation that we're in looks to imitate. None of us would then be saying that, this is really what's the hot shit if we know what we're saying. We say these types of things all the time, that we don't like things like cultural appropriation, whether it's stuff like from a song that is poorly created from a sample that was from an original track, or you have things like, you have, of course, all these redundant remakes to classic old films. We even say things like, in terms of the people around us, for instance, that we don't like being around fake people and how they try to act a way that they're just not. Or we just don't like, narcissistic, snotty people. But at the same time, yet and still, we all, in many respects, directly, indirectly, act these ways our own selves, if we're really being honest. The point is, you really or I, we wouldn't rather deal with any such things that are against that true flow, right? Offbeat to that ultimate flow. Again, this is why I try to exemplify that concept of constipation, because that's all we're doing. In a clear sense, that's what we are all doing. So again, we're going against that flow. We are looking to resist when that really doesn't make sense. That's very, what's the word? I mean, you're going to cause your own destruction. Clearly, it's not a good plan. So hopefully the point was made, and I always encourage people to watch some of the videos that I link in the description, especially if you're listening to me at this point, because, again, there's more to what this is here, just to be frank.